We are about to have our penultimate session, but our final keynote presentation of the day, which is taking the form of a fireside chat, but without the fire. You've got to imagine the fire. Apparently, we can't have an actual fire when we're doing this chat. But it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Ashworth, who is joining us from Nominet, which is probably one of the most influential Tech for Good organisations around. Invested £50 million so far in Tech for Good initiatives, and in 2021 they announced that they'll invest a further £65 million in 3 years, which will help ultimately 1 million people. Chris was formerly head of partnerships at Oxfam, and we're delighted to have him here today. And he will be interviewed by someone we all know very well, who's been at these events for the last couple of years, BBC's news correspondent, news anchor and broadcaster, who is back again by popular demand, Laura Goodwin. So please give a warm welcome to Chris Ashworth OBE and Laura Goodwin. And we've got the comfy seats for you as well. Look at the comfy seats.
Okay, ready?
Yeah, matching, just making sure.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me back. This is my third Tech for Good Summit, I think. And I love these fireside chats because we always kind of can have a bit of time to get into the nitty gritty of what you've achieved and how you've done it. And Chris, it's an absolute delight to have you with us. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about Nominet, and was it always the intention that it would have this public benefit core?
Yeah, well, first of all, great to be here, and thank you for having me as well. And really, I've had an incredible day listening to so many insights. It's been really inspiring. Yeah, so Nominet is the organisation that probably many people haven't heard of, but they actually stare at on their screens almost every day. It's the .co.uk. And for the last 26 years, it's been running the .uk namespace. We manage 11 million domains, .uk, .co.uk, .org.uk. So it's the kind of guardian of the UK domain space, and it's fairly unique because it's a membership organisation. So there's somewhere in the region of 2,600 members. And I suppose in terms of an organisation with a different set of attributes to what you might perceive as a commercial organisation, we don't have shareholders, we have members. And that means that deep within the constitution, from the founding fathers of Nominet as the country code, there was a public benefit mandate. And that can be delivered through the work you do on a day-to-day basis. I know lots of organisations, deep within what they do, they're a good organisation, they deliver products and services that people depend on, and Nominet has that, but also it has a surplus that it makes. And with that surplus, it was well before my time, because this is going back a long time, but it's one of the founding organisations, I suppose, of that community of Tech for Good. Mm-hmm. And over the years, that legacy has built and built and built as the concept of Tech for Good took hold across the UK and became something of an export in countries like France, Estonia, the US, and other countries that have these Tech for Good communities of practice now.
So maybe you can give us a bit of a sense of that evolution then, given that you have been in the space, the company has been in that space for quite a long time.
I think in the early days, so Tech for Good, I suppose, came around the 2008 time, and people would have heard of Nominet Trust, and Bethnal Green Ventures, and some of these anchor organisations in the space that were starting to pioneer the movement. And back in those days, really, there was more of an emphasis, I think, on the social entrepreneurship, the social tech organisations. And so that first phase was really about exploring, the world of apps and apps for good. It was interesting this morning, 360 Giving was one of our early seed funders. And so Nominet built a corporate foundation called Nominet Trust, and that provided seed funding and social capital to hundreds of organisations. In the end, I think it was 300 organisations that were provided seed funding from organisations as diverse as Open Bionics, which was 3D printed prosthetics, which completely disrupted the prosthetics world, and lots of other organisations that were working, I suppose. In that first era, it was about, and we have evolved since then. I think the whole Tech for Good community has evolved, but there was quite a lot of simple solutions to bounded problems. So you'd get a lot of people in the very early days going, there is an app for that. Very different to the example we've just seen, but it was kind of going, homelessness, there's an app for that. And then it started to evolve, and lots of really smart, interesting, clever people built themselves around that community, built communities of practice, built interventions, the Tech for Good meetups across the country, and there's lots of those. And it started to become more sophisticated. And people started to appreciate the complexity of some of the problems and the societal issues. And where in the early days it was kind of mimicking the tech sector through that early phase of kind of the digital revolution, the social media and Web 2, it then started, and I think this was really encouraging, it then started to branch off and go, hang on a minute, civil society, intractable social issues are harder and tougher in terms of innovation than simply replicating what we're seeing some of these huge organisations do, where it's the click of your fingers to create something new, a front of stage product. And to where we are now, I think that there's a much more sophisticated, coming here today and listening to some of the discussions and listening to some of the insights and the passion that so many people have here, where we're talking about the underlying kind of currents around all of the issues, the role of technology and how it intersects with people's lives, the sophistication has really grown incredibly. And it's evolved from that very early infant stage back in the noughties or teens or whatever they were. Don't know what the word is for those.
I think what you've said though is really interesting, because that realization that you know the most complex problems in our society are not easy to solve. There isn't a quick solution, and that is kind of at odds with, I suppose, some elements of the tech sector. Where let's try and fix that.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk us through some of the projects that you have been working on, and please feel free to tell us the difficulties in terms of the complexities and how you perhaps address those.
Well, I think as we evolved the Tech for Good mandate that we took, we started to develop a theory of change, which says, intractable or very difficult social issues are messy, complicated, and complex. So if you take access to education or educational inequality, well, actually, that issue has been around for 150, 170 years. That's when ragged schools got developed by Bernardo's, and that's when universal education came about. And then you've got this wave of new hybrid social issues. Digital technology is kind of slammed into society, probably around 2010, probably at the advent of lots of social media platforms and things like that, where we now have a new category or new categories of social issues. So in 1990, internet safety didn't exist as a social issue. In 2001, digital exclusion didn't exist as a social issue. If you read the papers this week, IWF released their online harms annual report. Some of the most serious child abuse and online harms issues did not exist in that form until now. And so these new issues, if we've struggled as a society to tackle deep-rooted poverty and destitution and homelessness and hunger and shelter and domestic violence and drug and alcohol abuse for millennia, then it's not surprising that some of these new hybrid social issues, we're just at the foothills of trying to decouple and trying to understand. And I think that a lot of the work that we've been trying to do in the last few years as Nominet through the Social Impact Programme is trying to stand back from those and look at patterns and look at common issues across the sector, across the space, where we're trying to go, is what we're seeing a symptom or is what we're seeing an underlying issue? So if I gave you one example, it might be in youth mental health. So one of the things that we've been really focused on since 2018 is tackling the steep rise in self-reported mental health and well-being issues for young people. And one of the first things, I think Tris has gone home now, if anyone was in that session earlier with Tris, but one of the things that we'd really advocate is discovery research. So really, really trying to get to grips with and understand the parameters of an issue before you dive in and start to invest in it. It'd be very, very easy to be quite wasteful, whether you're a funder, a charity, a philanthropist, all of those different things. It's very easy to identify an issue and then charge in and go, I'm trying to fix it. But if you try and stand back and do the discovery research and really understand what's going on, and one of the things that we did was do a lot of user testing, a lot of discovery research. And in youth mental health, particularly for the charities and the intermediaries, one of the things that we spotted was that there's 100,000 apps on the App Store claiming that they will address your mental health issues. And none of them, or very, very few of them, have any clinical evidence whatsoever. So if you are self-reporting that you have significant anxiety or you might be clinically depressed, an app telling you to paint your kitchen purple or buy a blue t-shirt is not going to get to the root of the issue. But that was the reality. In this digital age, you're faced with these products and services that are with no control over quality. And then when we turn to the youth mental health organisations, so Young Minds, Nightline, Anna Freud, The Mix, organisations with really, really deep expertise in mental health and a really keen understanding of exactly what young people are saying they need and who are calling them and contacting them, you have this disparity. So you have this situation where you've got organisations that are incredible at digital and have no clinical evidence whatsoever, and then organisations in the complete opposite, which have all of the clinical evidence and absolutely no skills in digital. And so the system, the space that we're looking at, there's something wrong with it. The system is broken. And so one of the programs that we built was the Reset Mental Health program. And that was to gently work with the leading youth mental health organisations in the UK and take them and steward them through a digital transformation process. And that was because when we were speaking to them, they were solutioneering. Their panic about the world of digital and the way that people were communicating with each other and the way that young people were wanting to reach out to them was, we don't know, understand, but let's build an app or let's integrate a chatbot, but we don't know why and we don't know what we're doing. And so this is sort of confusion reigned. So the big program that we built was, it's not sexy and cool as a Tech for Good program, but it is basically saying we need the organisations with the best clinical evidence, with the mandate to care and steward for hundreds of thousands of young people who are really struggling right now. We need to help them evolve into the 21st century with confidence and get them to a place where they're much more digitally mature, where the culture of the organisation is a lot more accepting and a lot less technophobic, a lot less worried about the concept of technology, and we've been working with them for a long, long time to do that.
I feel like you're downplaying that, saying that's not cool and sexy, but as a mum, I actually think that is really cool because, we have our children who are able to access so much information. We know that young people are sometimes self-diagnosing through TikTok and things like that now. So actually it's so important that there are reputable, trusted sources. And I'm really curious to hear what the mental health charities were saying to you about sort of them trying to navigate the space, not having that tech expertise, but I suppose desperately wanting to get people over to them to the right place.
I think there's been an acceptance. I think over it's funny because we talk, in these sorts of settings, we talk about different collectives and groups of organisations in one big homogenous mash. So we talk about funders, as though they're all the same. We talk about the commercial sector, but that can be anything from Google to a plumber. And there's quite a big difference. And then when we talk about civil society and charities and not-for-profits, so we were talking about organisations here who have infrastructure. So it might be the Samaritans. I've worked really closely with the Samaritans for the last 5 or 6 years, who have this incredible infrastructure all across the UK. But from a digital point of view, back in 2019, they were at a point where they kind of they had known unknowns. You're witnessing and watching people's behaviour change all of the time from a media point of view. You know, Snapchat and TikTok now are more used as search engines than Google. But back in 2019, people were going, hang on, we don't know how to develop an online chat service properly and well, but we know that the demand is there, and we know that young people want to reach us in that way more than they do trying to hold a telephone conversation at 3 a.m, hoping their parents won't be able to hear through the bedroom door. So there's a recognition, but I think there's that initial awareness, and then there's a stage of where if you can start to pair the organisations up with experts, people, skilled volunteers like everybody in this room, to breathe confidence and breathe a sense of process into the organisation, then that's when you start to see things change. And it's been wonderful watching the visible confidence rise over the years in that group of charities, and to them now being able to hold court themselves and have the confidence to be experts in that space.
So I'm curious, you come in with money, with expertise, but I'm wondering, how do you go beyond being just the funder? Where does that shift happen?
I think, I'm not sure. I suppose the shift for us is that every funder, every organisation in this space has a different set of attributes. So we are, despite the sort of sums that were talked about, we're not the biggest funder in the UK. You know, the National Lottery will spend what we've spent over 3 or 4 years in a single month. But our attributes, I think, being a public benefit company, being an organisation that's got deep-rooted history in supporting societal issues, of our independence and our I think, hopefully authenticity has meant that what we've been able to do is be issue-led and research-driven. And I think some of the greatest tools, the people who've mentored me over the years, people like Sarah Drummond from Snook, based up here in Glasgow, Ross I've worked with for a long time with Third Sector Labs, and people in the sector who can discern and unpick and unravel a complex societal problem at the beginning, take your time, build a relationship with those organisations and really pick apart and get under the skin of a problem, and then try and identify if you're seeing that pattern everywhere else. So I think we were very fortunate in some ways to see a pattern across the youth mental health space and go, we're seeing this common thread of a problem and a challenge everywhere, which is why I think, you know, the repository that was talked about a couple of sessions ago is absolutely essential and really progressive and really enlightened. And when we can see the pattern of a problem, then we can start to think about developing a program. Have we really defined that problem well? Can we define and develop a program to address the core levers in the system? And I think we started to do that with the youth mental health piece, which is in a way saying, the Samaritans, for example, an organisation that's been around for 70 years, has built this social infrastructure all across the UK, 20,000 volunteers, not digitally transformed at the time when we were working with them, but we cannot afford to lose the Samaritans and see them slowly decline or have a Kodak moment. We need to support them. They're fully capable of transitioning to this new future if they're given support and time and space.
Let's talk about what you think the next challenges are, because reading through a lot of your work, you still talk a great deal about digital inclusion. And that sometimes surprises people, that we are still in 2024 talking about vast swathes of society being excluded. Talk to us a bit about that and the work around that sector.
So I think some of similar, hopefully I'm going to try and come on to some of the principles and patterns at play that might be useful to people when they're thinking about this space. But digital inclusion, it's a really frustrating thing, because you've got still today 11 million people who are digitally excluded. And I'll talk about the kind of 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So digital exclusion is a circumstantial thing in many ways. You might not have the skills, you might not have the support, you might not have the data, or you might not have the device. If you're missing any one of those at any one point in time, then you are digitally excluded in those circumstances. And it feels like a really structural social issue. For example, if you are claiming benefits and you need to access universal benefits, but you don't have the skills to go online where you have to register, then social exclusion and digital exclusion are a kind of self-perpetuating cycle, which is really frustrating. But the levels of people who are digitally excluded, I believe, have increased. It used to be seen as a kind of issue affecting older people. But actually, over the last few years, with the cost of living crisis, and when you take a lens of circumstance rather than structure, then actually digital exclusion is ironically becoming a younger issue as well. During the pandemic, only 25% of young people on free school meals had access to a device and connectivity. So the educational attainment gap between the haves and have-nots went like this. We worked, as I mentioned before, with the BBC on the Give a Laptop campaign. But over the last few years, we also know that 2 million families have cancelled or downgraded their broadband because they're having to choose between heating and eating and getting online. If you are a refugee or asylum seeker, that phone and connectivity is your lifeline. So I think what we've also done in the digital exclusion space is go, have we really, really diagnosed the problem really well? Is it really just about older people and providing access in libraries anymore? I don't think it is. What interventions can we develop and can we make that will address the underlying issues and bring about sustainable long-term change? That's when tech for good for me is at its really, really, in its best place. That's a big
question. I mean, you're asking huge questions. So, how do you even begin to address that? Like, how does the process work when you sort of identify this is something we need to, something we need to be working on? How do you kind of get everyone together and sort of get minds focused?
So I think if you were codifying everything, I hope this does work if it is a tech audience. I'm going to try and codify everything and put it in a sequence because that's how hopefully all our brains work. But we went out at the first stage on the theory of change and said, what are the big contemporary social issues of the day where there are not enough funders and organisations acting on these issues? So we, with lots and lots of stakeholder work, we identified digital exclusion, essential online services, because the internet works for consumers but not necessarily always for citizens, as we've just said, digital skills, internet safety, and online harms. Once you've collected, if you like, and categorised what those issues are, then you move into a kind of problem definition phase. So it's the start of that double diamond. So if anyone hasn't come across the Design Council's double diamond, then it's kind of my go-to Bible for a tool that I find I obsess over. But if you can collectively agree what is the core problem, and I thought this morning was really interesting with Fozia around root causes and symptoms. I'd actually go one stage further and say there are symptoms, there are underlying issues, which I think is the level where tech for good is most potent and powerful, and then there are root causes. So what are the underlying issues around youth mental health? What are the underlying issues around digital exclusion? Have we diagnosed that problem? Have we listened as far and wide? Have we zoomed in and zoomed out? Did that the wrong way around. Zoomed in and zoomed out. And then can we think about co-designing and co-building a programme of funding, of a coalition, of a collective programme where people can see change happen over time. And then it takes the form of a fund, and then it takes the form of progress and impact, and then it takes the form of continuous learning and testing and alpha and beta and all the things that people here are probably very used to.
You had a charity background, so I guess you understood that world quite well. Talk to us about the team that you had to build. What the skills are you looking for when you're sort of trying to place people in the right positions?
If I could build my perfect tech for good Robocop.
Yes.
I don't know, that doesn't work, does it?
Someone's going to do that now.
So a benevolent version of Robocop. Yeah. Okay. The thing that, I hope they're not watching because this might involve complimenting my colleagues. I don't know about that. So for me, being able to step in and step out of a problem. So for me, everybody in this room has superpowers. and I've heard lots of it on show today, on lots of the panels and lots of discussions, but that superpower might, in the first instance, be you're a software engineer, or you're a database analyst, or you've got this tech skill. But actually the superpower for me is when you are talking to the organizations that you're partnered with and working with, and you can spot patterns and think in systems. That to me is the real superpower. When you can, I think Dougie, I don't know if Dougie, who was on the panel earlier, said it is not every charity really knows what it is they need to do. The kind of old Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns. And I think that, you know, the tech sector and tech folk have soft skills that are really undervalued or unseen. And that's that ability to see the whole system and then to tease out and understand what mechanics are really at play. So the skills in the team and what I hope we're good at is following through a process about an issue and then thinking about the system and then trying to identify the one lever that will have the most impact across the whole system. Accepting that you're trying to make the system, whether it's mental health or online or reduce online harms, you're trying to make that system healthier. There's no solution at the end of it. There's no magic app that will fix it. And that there might be some magic with tech that can intervene, but actually you're trying to nurture and move a system so that it's healthier. Is what you're doing going to have a universal impact for every young person in the UK? So asking those questions. Are you trying to lift all boats, or are you trying to help the most vulnerable young people in the UK? All those sorts of questions. So critical inquiry, thinking and observing a system, the ability to zoom in and zoom out, not accepting just what people say, but looking for patterns across civil society.
So those are quite complex success parameters in terms of kind of marking your own homework, what works, what doesn't work. But I'm going to ask you to do that. Maybe you can talk us through something that really did work. But I think sometimes it's also helpful to say, look, this was something we tried. This didn't work so well. So maybe you can give us some examples.
Well, the programme, I think the one very quickly that didn't work was when we grant funded to Bernardo's and they went, no, we're not doing that. It's a terrible idea. Can we spend it on a completely different project? Fair enough, yeah.
And why do you think that happened?
I think you can make assumptions. I think you can, it's a very dynamic space. Lots of people change hands. So what seems a good idea at one time changes over time very quickly in the world of tech for good. So there's lots of reasons why you have to be quite dynamic and agile, I think. But in terms of the programs that I think are most powerful and most important is the current one in countering online harm.
Yeah.
At the moment, one of the endemic and most difficult issues that we work on is child sexual abuse and exploitation online. The reported number of incidents and issues has gone up and has been rising exponentially over the last few years, since we started the programme in 2018. And the organisations that we've been working with and supporting have been fighting fire. And they are pulled into addressing the urgent and essential all of the time. And a number of years ago, we went to speak to them about innovation and about tech for good and the role of technology in fighting this, abhorrent social issue that goes unseen in so many respects, but is so complex. And we went round all the organisations, so the Internet Watch Foundation, we even went to the National Crime Agency, and we spoke to all of the technology teams, and we spent a lot of time, and a lot of the responses that we were heard were, if we had this bit of tech kit, if we had this platform, if we had this stack, if we had this, and a lot of the conversation was around, we don't have this, or we don't have that. Or if we had the budget, we would do this, or if we had budget, we would do that. And we came away from it, and there was a weird sort of epiphany moment, because what they were saying and what we heard, and when we gave ourselves a little bit of space and went back to check our thinking, what we heard was, it wasn't innovation and tools that they were lacking. It was the time and the mandate to think about transformative change. One of the things that I think goes unrecognised for the third sector is that the third sector has an absolute obligation to respond to the immediate threats and dangers. Having worked at Oxfam, when there was a humanitarian crisis, that meant, you tapped on the shoulder and you dropped everything because lives were at stake. And if you work for the Internet Watch Foundation, you have to prioritise addressing the most important and urgent things now. And they're fighting this ever-growing exponential rise in online abuse. What that meant was they didn't have the mandate and the time and space to innovate and to think about the transformational leaps. They're fighting against hidden actors across the dark web, across networks of countries who are conspiring against them. And every time there's a big technological leap, the most heinous actors are leaping forward faster. So you're always fighting just to try and catch up. You're racing just to stand still. And so what we heard and what we've eventually developed, and it's not myself, it's the team at Nominet, is the Countering Harm Tech Innovation Fund. And it prescribes nothing. It doesn't say, you're building this, you're doing that. It basically says, here is a call-off fund. You can draw down on it any time, but you can build what you need to build and have the time and space and the mandate.
So who can draw from that fund?
The organisation. So we've built 3 coalitions.
Gosh, okay.
So there's a lead actor across each coalition. So the Internet Watch Foundation, Parent Zone and Lucy Faithfull Foundation. And we're already seeing some of the early outcomes of that. So now that IWF have got the mandate and the space to innovate, they've been able to develop the IntelliGrade sandbox, the platform upon which they can then start to do really accelerated innovation. They've just announced, I think this week, about clustering technology, which means that their analysts, the people who have to review the photos and the images and the videos, they can double the amount in terms of their productivity. That productivity has been mentioned today, but they're 112% quicker in removing content online. That space has enabled them to double their effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And there's a number of other innovation sprints. And what we've not done, what Nominet hasn't done, is been innovative. We've said, you know best, and we can provide you with the space to innovate because you know best. We trust you. You are the experts. You're the ones living this every day. Have the space to do that. And the same with the Parent Zone Consortium, which is working on child financial harms. The biggest area of fraud is now online, and the risks to young people of fraudulent activity is huge. We're not going to solve that by dictating to them or telling them to create a solution to something now and it all magically goes away. They need a space to innovate, a safe sandbox for tech for good innovation. And so for me, some of the future of tech for good is around, and particularly it's been reinforced by listening to a lot of the conversations today, is are organisations like Nominet giving you the space, the time to build relationships between the third sector and the tech sector and have the breathing space to innovate and to think deeply about the problems and to fail fast, as we said before, and learn quicker. But do you have the time, space and resources to do that? Because this really complex, messy world of technology and society that has intersected really quickly and taken us all a little bit by surprise is only getting a bit messier. And so we need to give people headroom to be able to think. And I think that's one of the things that organisations like ourselves and the Microsofts and the PwCs can do for people, is to give them time to think.
I mean, there's this perception, isn't there, within perhaps wider society, that big tech isn't doing enough in terms of online harms. Does it frustrate you when you hear that, knowing that it might not be the headline news, but there are things going on underneath that are helping, that are trying to counter these harms?
Nominet as an organisation has worked a long time with IWF. I don't count us as a big tech firm, I suppose.
But do you know what I mean? There is this perception that tech firms are it's the Wild West.
It's and I think on a personal level, I think there's some legitimacy to a lot of technologies being rushed out willfully in order to preempt and swerve regulation, but equally. Tech, I think we discussed before, tech is neither good nor bad, but it's definitely not neutral. And so there are these really big implications that technology is having on the social fabric of society, and we are guinea pigs at the moment. The snow globe has really been shaken, I think, in the last 18 months in particular, with the enormity of a new category of harms. And I think that if I had a magic wand, the tech sector has talked about usability for 10, 15 years as a core tenet of what it does, but it's never talked about abusability. And I think that if I had a magic wand, I'd get into those, product development schools, those tech schools, and think about what is the discipline of abusability. What's the very worst thing that could happen if you release and launch this product? It might not, and it won't, but just have a view on it and develop a guideline and a principle around that, as well as doing what's the very best thing that could happen because of this product. And I think that we still haven't got to grips with what are all those unintended consequences of technology. And so we kind of experiment on ourselves. And sometimes that makes you feel really nervous.
Yeah, but I think that's a really interesting point, and I think we'll be thinking a bit about that in terms of what would those conversations look like. What would your advice be for someone in the audience today who's thinking, I think we could do something in the sector. I'm interested in moving into the tech for good sector. Yeah. What would you say? What are the pitfalls? What to look out for, and what would be your your golden rules for kind of going forward?
There was a guy in a hat earlier. I think it's you there. I think it might have been you. I don't know. I might be pointing at someone who said it wasn't me, but
he doesn't look like he's met you before.
No. There was a chap in a hat who earlier said, "Well, what should I do if I wanted to come into this space?" For me, and I've had this conversation with lots and lots of people, is fundamentally, what are you really passionate about? So someone earlier said, you've got to make sure it's fun. You've also got to make sure it's really, really meaningful. So if it's a deeply held passion for you, then that's the field maybe that you want to get into. And I think then whether it's a person who wants to work in tech for good, which I'm never even sure whether it's a noun or an adjective or what it is, but I like it.
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. Yeah. Okay. Then I think it's about, there's a universal principle of relationship first, task second. Go and build a relationship with the organisation. Wander around with the CEO of that small charity. Go and speak to users. Go and get a deep understanding, just like you would do it, through an induction at a new company. A good CEO of a company would never make too many decisions in the first 100 days. You're observing, you're listening, you're understanding. What are the dynamics at play? Just like the brilliant example we had here just on the panel before. People really understood the organisations and the utility of the application. So build a deep understanding. Don't assume what you've been told is what's really under the skin of everything. Ask the organisation what its biggest problems are, what are its biggest challenges. Understand if the organisation is working at structural issues or circumstantial issues. So just be really, really bloody curious, I think is probably
you don't shy away from a difficult conversation. I can tell that you want to ask those difficult questions. Yeah,
we've been sat in a lot of conversations where, and we gave the classic example before where someone says, we want to build a chatbot, or we want to completely redo our website, or we need this. And you're like, do you? Why? Or why did you get to that point? Sort of tell me why. It's not a confrontational situation to really, really explore with someone. And actually, I think it's really valuable that you're taking the time to listen. And then once you really feel like you've diagnosed what's really at play, I think there's incredible talent in this room. You don't want to go into work with an organisation and they've told you, we want to redesign our homepage, when really underneath that, they have a deeper issue about how they connect with their users. Yeah. You want to work on that. So before you dive in, take time to really understand what needs working on, what needs developing, and is it a universal problem across a number of organisations? Can you reuse that technology? There was a chap from Fife Young Carers here earlier. How can you join all the organisations in a space together so that collectively they're more than the sum of their parts?
Yeah. What do you think's next for Nominet? You've talked about the areas that you're working on just now. Do you guys try and look ahead a bit about what's coming up? What do you think will be the next sort of big focus for you guys? Yeah,
well, we're deep in the delivery of, as Alistair said, about some of the really, really big programs. So we've just delivered 700,000 BBC microbits to every primary school in the country. And the reason why that's looking ahead is because at the moment, or for the last number of years, I've been trying to tackle this twin problem with lots of other organisations, I should say, not just me. I'm just trying to tackle this social issue of the skill shortage in the tech sector and youth underemployment and unemployment. And it's at odds that there's 800,000 jobs missing in the tech sector and 800,000 young people unemployed or underemployed. And you're like, surely there's a jigsaw piece here that fits. But it's hard to shift. And one of the reasons that underpinning that is young people's confidence and motivation to use and have a hands-on relationship with technology and the inside of technology. So we've tried to think about how can we make sure that every young person in the UK has a chance to be comfortable and excited and motivated about working with technology. And so in the immediate future, we're about to tell the entire population of young people in the UK that AI doesn't work if you don't program it well. And I am so excited about this. We're going to trick every 11-year-old in the country because we've built a piece of a curriculum with the Microbit Foundation, the BBC, where young people on the MakeCo platform can build their own, train their own AI model when they wave and when they clap. And what's quite brilliant about it is it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because when they put their hands still, it recognises it as a clap, but the teacher knows. And so we're going, I hope, through all of this work with the microbit, demonstrate to every young person in the UK, which I think will be a world first, that if you don't train AI correctly, then you can't trust the results that come out of it. And if we can at least instill that kernel of critical awareness in young people, I'm really excited about that. Going, oh, it doesn't work. I think is really funny.
I think that's absolutely, and I'm so excited because I have 11-year-olds, so I'm looking forward to I'll say nothing about it.
Don't give it's a national adult secret, so you're not allowed to tell anyone.
Tell no one. Tell no one. Listen, I don't want to hog you because there might be people in the audience that also want to ask a question. So, look, for one night only, we have Chris. So if there's any questions that you would like to ask, please build on his expertise. We've got a question here.
Thank you very, very much for...
Oh, hold on. Alistair is racing round to you.
Thanks, Alistair. Thank you very much for a fascinating and inspiring discussion. You're talking about digital exclusion, Chris, but I wonder if that's only half the equation, because if you've not got a bank account, you're just as much excluded as if you're digitally excluded. Do you have any handle on the number of people who are excluded from the banking system? Because the two may go hand in hand.
They absolutely do, and I think that I'll give a shout out to some really good colleagues at Lloyd's Bank. They've produced the Digital Consumer Index for the last 8 or 9 years, which brings those two aspects together about financial, social, and digital exclusion, because there is a huge overlap. I couldn't confidently, as a non-banker, tell you the exact crossover. But there is, and I think there's you're pointing to an important, deeper issue that I think is really important, that the internet has been great for the consumer, but not necessarily brilliant over the last 15 years for the citizen. And when we think about essential online services, so money and debt advice, financial services, access to benefits, access to disability allowance, all of those other suite of things that the front door to the welfare state has moved online, but we've not brought the people who need the welfare state the most online with it. And again, when we talked about resetting the balance and some of the bigger things at play, that concerns me. I've been campaigning outside of Nominet and outside of all this world to zero rate all essential services for the last few years, which means basically remove the price so that the sender, a bit like Free Post, the sender pays for the data, because Nesta in Scotland did a report a few years ago that data poverty and inability to get online because of the cost of getting online is another one of those foundational aspects. But I think it does link to financial exclusion. It's not just the banks and the banking apps that people don't have access to. It's cash. It's money, full stop. This cost of living crisis is deep. This year, I was at a conference with BT, one of our, the biggest organisations in the UK, and they'd commissioned research, and for the first time in a long time, they included the word destitution, not poverty, not disadvantage, not vulnerability, but destitution. So I think we've got a long way to go to think about the citizen's relationship with digital and what a digital welfare state really looks like in the 21st century.
Thanks very much, Chris. It was a really interesting talk. I think one thing that really sat with me was when you talked about charities in the social space are working on hard issues that take a long time to solve. And I was struck by, you gave the example of the skills mismatch where there's people needing employment, there's empty jobs available. And it struck me that by the time we notice a social issue, there's many years of problems behind that. And I wondered if you had a steer on that kind of need for persistence, because obviously, often a kind of a feature you get from the tech sector is that desire to move quickly and solve things and address issues.
Yeah.
And that piece about, not being complacent or fatalistic, but sort of setting ambition and saying what's realistic.
I think there was a time, I think it's a really good question. I don't necessarily have the answer, but I have a reflection and perspective that there was an era during Tech for Good where we were mimicking and copying and following the lead of the tech sector or the big tech, the move fast and break things, and it was kind of cool to use the word disruption. And that was kind of felt like a bit of a purple patch for Tech for Good, because it was growing, it was booming, and lots of people involved. I think now, and particularly today, it's definitely revitalised it, where there's a more discerning. Tech for Good is a parallel world to the tech sector, and it's more able to look at nuanced social issues and think progressively and think different and accept that social issues and civil society are not poorer, smaller versions of the big tech and the commercial world, but are sectors and systems in their own right. And we need to look at them in isolation and think differently, and our models and our processes and our frameworks need to be built around civil society and its needs and society's needs. So I think we've kind of escaped the sort of, hanging on to the coattails of Silicon Valley from 10 years ago, and now there's something different emerging, and lots of the tools that Kirsty talked about developing are incredibly valuable and incredibly progressive, but they're not just smaller, poorer versions of what exists in the tech sector.
Any more questions?
I'm desperate that if I was right about it.
I don't know if you were.
Please just say yes. No.
Yeah, sure, why not? It's funny that you mentioned AI, because obviously that's a buzzword that everyone is currently chatting about, and obviously I think the key takeaway I would like to think is, where do you think AI would fit into the ability to maybe even try and identify digital whatever it was called again. Because I think there's a possibility there where you could try and identify root causes of it through AI coming from lots of different data sets to try and identify digital poverty, where the causes of it are, possibly like then be able to target ways to resolve that, because it's the same as everything. What you think is what could be the issues in front of you isn't actually what's causing the issue underneath it. So it's like, where do you think AI could come in to possibly help identify those or get better ideas about them?
I could definitely give you a really trite thing about AI and go, yeah, I think it's going to change the world. And I can't. And I think there's an honesty missing from the conversation when, if any of us go on LinkedIn or X or anywhere and there's 1,000 people telling you about what AI is going to do. They don't know, we don't know. It's so emergent. The snow globe, as I said before, has been really shaken. And part of what I've tried to suggest today is your ability to stand back neutrally and zoom out and observe patterns and observe issues calmly and then determine what the best thing to do, I think still holds. What possibly you're suggesting there, which I think is quite right, the question is how good are we at prompts? So there's a lot of data sets out there. There's a lot of incredible data sets that could show incredible patterns. So the one example that I'd give is the Samaritans. So over a number of years, we installed the intelligent dashboard with them. Information that the Samaritans had never had for all of their existence was up until that point of the intelligent dashboard. They couldn't tell people when they came in to volunteer whether they should work on the phone, on email, or any other medium. And the front end of the dashboard was able to immediately tell the volunteer when to do. But for the first time, they were able to aggregate that data that they had over a number of years and start to see patterns, start to realise that at 3 a.m. on a Sunday is when the telephones were spiking. Or that actually Blue Monday wasn't really true in January, and actually there's a really, really weird spike in August, late August, September, that wasn't really well explained. And so that ability to pattern recognise and predict is incredibly powerful, and we're still waiting to get there. AI could augment the ability for Samaritans to be able to then bring that data set together with other data sets and other academic studies, et cetera, but it requires that prompting ability of that human to be able to go, what question am I really asking? Am I zooming in? Am I zooming out? I've done it the wrong way again. But so I think that curiosity still holds. I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen with AI in the next few years. But if you do, I'll definitely buy you a drink later.
Yeah, we're not done with yet, are we? Human race is still needed.
Yes, we're still doing all right.
For a bit longer.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
It's been an absolute
Except for RoboCop.
Except for which someone's building.
Except for good RoboCop, yeah.
Except for that.
Yeah.
Listen, it's been an absolute delight speaking to you, Chris. I feel that we've all learned so much from you, and thank you so much for the work that your company is doing around online harms. It's very important work, and we really do appreciate it. So everyone, a big thank you to Chris Ashworth.
Thank you.